My name is Zane. I am 65 years old. I have buried a wife, worked 4 decades without complaint, and raised a son I loved more than my own comfort. But nothing in my life prepared me for the moment I realized I was no longer seen as a father, only as a bank account. The house that held my memories. The house was quiet that afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the curtains Clara had sewn herself 20 years ago. Her favorite rocking chair still sat near the window, untouched since the day we lost her. 5 years. 5 long years without her laughter echoing through these walls. Daniel and Melissa arrived without calling. That alone stirred unease in my chest. They used to call. Clara had taught Daniel manners. She used to say, "Respect begins at the front door." Melissa stepped inside first, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar in the air that once smelled of Clara's cooking. Daniel hugged me quickly, too quickly. We sat at the table where birthdays were celebrated and hard conversations once ended in understanding, but this was different. The air felt heavy. Melissa spoke first. "We've been planning for the baby," she said, resting a protective hand over her stomach. "And honestly, Zane, we need help." Her tone wasn't soft, it wasn't ashamed. It was entitled. The justification. Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad, housing prices are crazy. Hospital bills too. We want the best for our child." "And you should," I replied gently. "Every parent does." Melissa leaned forward. "You have enough saved. You don't need that much at your age." "At your age?" I smiled faintly. "At my age, I need security more than ever." She sighed as though I were being unreasonable. "What are you saving it for? You've already lived your life." Those words settled into my bones like winter. Already lived my life. Was I finished? Was I simply waiting to fade away? Daniel stayed silent. That hurt more than her words. "Family helps family," she added firmly. "If you really love this baby, you'll transfer your savings to us." Love measured in dollars. 42 years. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, my mind traveled backward. 42 years in the same manufacturing plant, double shifts, overtime during holidays, hands cracked from winter cold, back aching by 45, Clara working part-time so we could afford Daniel's college tuition. We skipped vacations, we drove old cars, we postponed dreams. Because we believed in building something stable. Because we believed sacrifice would be respected. I looked at my son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, so he could see fireworks. "Is this what you want?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Yes, Dad, it would make everything easier." Easier. For them. The night I spoke to Clara. After they left, the house felt emptier than it had since Clara's funeral. I sat in her rocking chair and stared at her photograph. "Would you tell me to give it?" I whispered. Clara believed in generosity. But she also believed in dignity. I opened my banking app. The numbers glowed on the screen. They weren't just numbers. They were years, they were sacrifices, they were safety. And suddenly, something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry. I was awake. The decision. When they returned 3 days later, Melissa didn't waste time. "Have you made the transfer?" I looked at Daniel. "Once I do this, there's no going back." He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "I'll handle it tomorrow," I said calmly. Melissa smiled in satisfaction. But she misunderstood my calmness. It wasn't surrender. It was clarity. The bank. The next morning I wore my best suit, the one Clara liked, not because I was giving away money. Because I was reclaiming something. At the bank, I asked to withdraw everything. The teller looked surprised. "Everything, Mr. Zane?" "Yes, everything." But I did not send it to Daniel. Instead, I divided it carefully. A large portion went into a protected trust under my name, secured for my future needs. Another portion went into a long-term educational account for my unborn grandchild, accessible only when the child turns 18. And then, I did something Clara and I had talked about for 30 years. I bought a one-way ticket to Italy. The escape that wasn't an escape. I left without drama. No confrontation. Just a short message. I have handled my savings. I need time for myself. Take care of your family. Dad. As the plane lifted off, I felt something unexpected. Not guilt. Not fear. Freedom. For decades, I had defined myself by what I gave. Now I wanted to discover who I was without being needed. Italy and the man I forgot. In Rome, I walked cobblestone streets at sunrise. In Florence, I sat in quiet cafes and wrote in a journal for the first time in my life. In Venice, I stood by the water at dusk and whispered Clara's name into the wind. I wasn't running from my son. I was running toward myself. At 65 years old, I realized something powerful. Life does not expire just because others think you are finished. I laughed with strangers. I tasted food slowly. I slept without worrying about someone else's expectations. And for the first time since Clara passed, I felt whole. The call. 2 weeks later, I turned my phone back on. Dozens of missed calls. Voicemails filled with urgency. When I finally answered Daniel's call, his voice cracked. Dad, I'm sorry. Silence stretched between us. You made me feel like a wallet, I said gently. I know, he whispered. Melissa and I fought after you left. I realized how wrong we were. There was no anger left in me, only honesty. You forgot I'm still alive, Daniel. I'm not an inheritance waiting to happen. He cried, and hearing my grown son cry reminded me he was still human too. Confrontation and growth. When I returned home a month later, Daniel hugged me differently. Longer. Stronger. Melissa came days later. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid of not being enough for my child. I turned fear into control. Fear does that, I said quietly, but it doesn't justify disrespect. She nodded. For the first time, she saw me. Not as a savings account. As Zane. A new arrangement. I kept control of my finances. But I showed them the educational fund for the baby. Daniel cried again when he realized I had planned for my grandchild, just not in the way they demanded. I wanted to help, I said. I just refused to be pressured. From that day forward, boundaries replaced expectations. Respect replaced entitlement. And strangely, our relationship became stronger than before. The real lesson. The day I emptied my account was not an act of revenge. It was an act of self-respect. I learned that love without boundaries becomes exploitation. I learned that age does not erase your right to live fully. And I learned that sometimes, walking away temporarily is the only way others learn your value. Moral of my story. Never let anyone, not even family, measure your worth by what you can give them. Help from love, give with intention, but protect your dignity at all costs. Because once dignity is lost, even money cannot buy it back. My name is Zane. I am 65 years old. And the day they asked for my savings was the day I discovered I was worth more than the balance in my bank account.